So when Kevin and I wanted to do this, we thought it'd be kind of interesting to do a little bit of both. I do a lot of work in project management, and I do a lot of teaching and coaching in project management. But we thought it'd be nice to mix it up because not everybody's in that role or needs to be in that role. Just curious, though, how many of you are working in-house versus like in a consulting business? So in-house. You. And how about then? So consultants, independent developers. Okay, both. Everybody. You guys are doing product. Okay. Good. Well, this should be applicable. This is really conceptual stuff that I'm going to talk about here. A little bit of background about my project management skills and where I come from there, and kind of how that leads into the Elusive Moose. In 2005. Wow, boy, it's just funny how it just keeps getting further and further away from me. I was working as a developer, like I mentioned earlier, with the company out in Philadelphia, and we were looking for a way to make our projects better. We were good, we weren't great, but the interesting thing about and you could probably relate to this if you do any kind of consulting work, the thing was that we were unable to predict when a project would be successful or would fail at any point along the path. Like it was impossible. When we had a great project, in looking back, I test that to the fact that we got lucky. We had a good client and we had a good developer who got along, and then we would have a good project. But you would sometimes never really know if there was going to be good chemistry, and that's really no way to run a business, right? It's really no way to say, well, hopefully this client will get along with the developer that we just so happen to pick and put on that project, and then maybe we'll be okay. Otherwise, the whole thing could go off the rails. And they did frequently. So we were looking for a method, and around 2005, we were studying agile methodologies, Scrum in particular, and we learned, we brought in a consultant, we did some training, we learned how to do it. But Scrum at that time, this is only a few years after it was really sort of formalized into some books and some greater texts. It was new, and it was really developed for these large enterprise in-house shops. And here we were, a FileMaker shop, running very small projects in relative terms, with a single developer usually taking the reins and running with it. So we had to modify that methodology. We did so. We started to see some success, and I really loved it, and I really embraced it, adopted it, and I started to bring it to the community. In 2007, remarkably almost 10 years ago, I did a DevCon talk on Agile and how it could work in the FileMaker space, published a white paper, and that sort of propelled me into this world of training and coaching this methodology. Eventually, when I left ITS and started my own thing, I started working with a lot of other companies implementing this method. So that's the methodology that I've worked with, but that's not really what I'm going to talk about. What I'm going to talk about is even higher level. So through training and coaching and subcontracting and working as a PM in a lot of different environments, I was able to tickle out what I'm calling 3 attributes of an awesome project manager. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. 3 attributes of an awesome project manager. Before that, let me tell you a little bit about this. And there was one question about the name and why does what I'm going to talk about fit this, or why do I have this slide up, I guess is the question. And the reason is because at Elusive Moose, Molly and I have a goal, a mission, if you will, to help individuals build a fulfilling career in consulting, right? So we're out there in the software development space, and we're consulting our clients, and we're helping them solve their workflow problems and their efficiency problems, and we're building technology solutions to complement that. And we've expanded our reach outside of the software space to any kind of consulting, marketing consulting, app dev, or web developers, or anybody who's coming into a company, serving their clients and saying, you have a problem and we're going to help you solve that problem. So project management is a big part of that, because typically what consultants do, at least the initial engagement, is a project. And so at Elusive Moose, we're creating resources, primarily through a website, that help consultants work better, right? Become better at what they do, we try to help them remove the roadblocks that are standing in their way of really enjoying their work day to day, like Molly and I have for years running these consulting businesses. So that's the connection. The question was, why is it called Elusive Moose, if that's what we're doing? And the story is that Molly, 10 years ago or so, had a business client in Alaska. And she made 3 business trips to Alaska in a relatively short period of time. And it was a thing with her that she wanted to see a real live moose. Like she said, I'm going to Alaska, I'd like to see this moose, like whatever. So her client up there was like, oh, it's no problem. They're like, you know, they're everywhere. They eat out of the garbage can. You drive down the road, you got to stop, beep the horn. They're just everywhere. So Molly goes to Alaska and she goes there 3 times and she never sees a moose, never. She would go with colleagues and she would say, I want to see a moose. And they would say, well, you should go to this place for lunch because there are always these moose nearby. And so she would go by herself or maybe with one other person, go have lunch there, come back and be like, there were no moose. They'd be, oh, there were 3 of them walked by as soon as you left. They walked, you know, right past the window. You missed them. So there was Molly in Alaska 3 times, never saw a moose. And it became a thing with her, this elusive moose, right? And the metaphor is that there are things that are supposed to be simple. There are things that are supposed to take no real effort. And when you start your own consulting company, you have to do everything, right? You might be a really good software developer, and so you want to start your own software consulting business, and then you do, and then you realize, I have to learn everything. I have to learn sales and marketing and accounting and project management and how to develop and maintain and all this stuff on your own. And there's always those 1 or 2 things that you look around to all your colleagues and your friends, and they have no problem doing, but for some reason you just can't wrap your head around it. Well, the solution to those problems are your elusive moose, right? So the idea is that we want to provide resources for all of these different consultants of a variety, and we want to give them an opportunity to find their elusive moose. That's where the name comes from. And you can actually find your moose in Chicago on September 7th and 8th. Our 2nd annual Find Your Moose conference is all the stuff I just talked about. It's a 2-day conference, single track conference, be about 100 people. So a lot of, you know, tight sessions. You can talk to the speakers, network with like-minded people. And this work life for consultants. Last year was our first one. So this is the second annual one that's coming up on the 7th and 8th of September. You can go to findyourmoose.com and find out all the details about that. And at elusivemoose.com is our website where we're generating all these materials, and it's a membership website. There's a whole bunch of free stuff, the blog and the podcast, but you can also become a member, which gives you a very significant discount to the conference, plus access to all the conference videos from last year. Molly is doing a series of video expert interviews that are accessible to members, and we're also developing now a series of moose guides, which are sort of like mini white papers, taking the topics that we're exploring and going a lot deeper in these topics. So all that stuff, I'd be glad to talk more about it later, but you can check it out at elusivemoose.com or Find Your Moose. So tonight we're talking about 3 attributes of an awesome project manager. Again, this is above the methodology. So I use a flavor of Scrum and have used that for my software development practice for many years, but I'm not going to talk specifically about the methodology. In this case, what I want to talk about is what I have found to be these 3 attributes of an awesome project manager. So all these project managers I've worked with and coached and trained, I find these 3 attributes to be a common thread. So if you are a project manager, or if you are thinking about becoming a project manager, what I'm about to share with you are things that I think you are, you know, hopefully at least somewhat hardwired for. Or you might recognize 1 or 2 of these things and say, well, that would be an area that I could use some work on. And you can seek some professional development around it. And I think it would really help propel you into that role. So the role of project manager, I use this illustration because when you're a project manager, what you're doing is you're sitting in between a variety of people and circumstances in a spoked wheel. This is not a hierarchical position, right? It's not a position where you are a supervisor and you are directing people. In the context of one of these creative projects, the PM sits right in the middle of this spoked wheel, And the spokes of the wheel typically represent, and most obviously represent, the players. So you might have a developer that you're working with, you might have a QA person you're working with, you might have your boss, right? If you're, like in my case, I was working for a development company. So I had my boss and my boss's boss. These are stakeholders that I was, you know, responsible to report to. You have your project owner, the person on the client side, who is your primary contact. You would have your subject matter experts on that side. You might also have the real stakeholder. And when I say real stakeholder, I mean the person who signs the check on the other side, who may or may not be the same person that you're reporting directly to or coordinating directly with. So you have a lot of people to deal with and a lot of people to coordinate when you're in this role of project manager. And so the spoked wheel is a good metaphor for that, because you're really sitting in the middle. And one of the things that happens when you're sitting in the middle is sometimes you kind of get lost in the shuffle. I'm going to come back to that, like kind of the what we call success in the role of project management in just a little bit. These are the three attributes that I have found to be very common. I'll break down each one of them, go through them, and then we'll wrap up with some questions about how this relates to you and what you can think about in terms of these three attributes. Confidence, flexibility, and detachment. So again, these are attributes of people that I have seen who have done a very, very good job in the role of project management. Let's look at each one. We'll start with confidence. So to be a great project manager, to be an awesome project manager, you need to express, right, a very high level of confidence. Because when you're sitting in the middle of this, wheel, it's very important that everybody around that wheel trusts you, right? And there are some ways that you can express that confidence. There are ways of behaving, right? There are things that you can do, some very practical things that you can do to help you get to that spot where you can act in a confident way within the context of that project. The first one, and the primary one, is knowing the process that you're going to use. Now, you might have a general understanding, but you really need to know the fine details of the process that you're going to use to run that project. And I don't care what it is. Like, I'm an advocate of using Agile in the software development world, but I'm also talking about project managers who do other types of consulting, where Agile isn't really a thing, and nor should it be. Or even within the context of software development, there very well may be other methodologies that fit the chemistry and the makeup of the team. You know, and that's fine. I'm not advocating that. I'm not saying that you need to use a particular methodology to be competent. I'm saying whatever it is, you need to know it. If I met you tonight at this meeting for the first time and I said, you know, how do you report budget and status to your clients? And you say, well, I don't really know, or well, I guess it kind of depends, or, you know, if you can't articulate that, you don't know your process. Why is it so important? Why is that such an important thing? The importance of that is because when I engage with my client for the first time, when we kick off that meeting and I am in control, or supposed to be in control, I want that client to know that they can trust me, that they are in good hands. And knowing exactly how we're going to do that process, how we're going to execute this project, is imperative. Because at the very beginning of that project, the first 5 minutes of that first meeting, this is after you've written the estimate and this is after you've gotten sign off and we're engaging. The very, very first 5 minutes of that first meeting is yours to lose. Because right at that moment, it's a love fest. Right at that moment, right, your client has decided that you can solve their problem, and they're willing to invest a lot of money to do it. And they've probably looked at a number of shops, a number of developers, and they've chosen you. So they're coming into the first 5 minutes of that meeting going, this is the guy that's going to do it for me right here. And they chose you, so it's their decision, right? It's just like when you drive the new car off the lot. The minute you drive onto the public street, the value goes down. Well, the minute you open your mouth, you're at risk of them losing confidence or faith in you that you've just sold them on, or maybe you had a salesperson sell you or your company on. So when you walk into that meeting and they say, all right, we're ready to get started, you better start, and you better start confidently. So you know your process and you can begin to articulate that process and walk them through. You are a coach leading a team, and they are part of that team. just as much as your people are. Now, you need to continue to educate the process throughout the project, right? You are like a sports coach in this context. In most sports, I'm not a big sports person. I'll use a sports analogy, though. In most sports, it is my understanding that the head coach of the team does not prepare the team for the season and then go home. Most. I don't know. Seems to me like when I watch the Super Bowl, the head coach is still there, right? The team was good enough to go all the way to the Super Bowl, yet the head coach is still there on the sidelines with the defense after they've just blown a play, teaching and coaching and making adjustments, right? And getting to the end of that game and attempting to win it. And that's your role as PM. You have to continue coaching and educating everybody throughout that process, because 9 times out of 10, your customer, your client, has never been through a custom software development project before. I just made that number up, but I bet it's a very high number, right? And if they have been, at least in the in the past, chances are it was a horrible experience. I think custom software development has gotten a lot better in the last 10 years. But I know when I started managing projects, the numbers were ridiculous. When they would do those big surveys, when it was like 50% of all software projects fail, and another 10 or 15% are unsatisfactory, but are still considered okay. And it was just like this abysmal, it's like ridiculous, right? How many software development projects were considered failures. So you're starting, if you're lucky if you haven't, if you have a client who hasn't experienced it yet, because you have an opportunity right there, right, to make a great impression. So you continue to educate the PM process throughout. And finally, to express confidence, arm yourself with information, which means you need to have your internal systems, whatever they are, you need to have your internal systems in place so that at any time when you need information, like a customer calls you up and says, where are we with that project? You can say, hold on just a minute. Pull it up. We're doing just fine. Here's where we are on budget. Here's where we're on status. We're at risk, or we're not at risk, or whatever the information is. You can get to that information quickly. You can get to that information when you need it. When you walk into a meeting, you know exactly what it is you need to talk about. You know what the priorities are. You know what the process is, and you follow it. Awesome project managers execute their projects with the utmost confidence, and their clients know it. Now, flexibility has to do with the fact that we are in the business of change by the very nature of what we do as consultants. We are brought in to change something. There is either something that is broken, right? Like, oh, our process is broken. We need a technology solution to fix it, right? That is change. Or we just want to get better. My customer might say, I'm getting ready to grow. Getting ready to grow. I'm going to double my capacity in the next 6 months. I need help, right? Or if you're a marketing consultant, maybe the change is we need to implement a campaign. Whatever it is, we are in the business of changing things, right? So the only inevitable thing that's going to happen throughout this process is that things are going to change. You need to learn how to accept it. There was a time in my software development career, and I'm sure if anybody's been doing this for an extended period of time, there was a time when change was looked at as a bad thing. Change was seen as evil. In other words, you would define a project, you would write maybe a multiple dozen page specification, or you'd spend hours and hours and hours getting the perfect technical document put together. They would sign off on it. Everybody would be in agreement. At about 4 seconds later, something would change and everybody would freak out, right? Because that's not what it says. Now we have a change form and we have to manage change, right? So it's like, and it's bad. Like I'm going to charge you more money, and you said this and you said that. Well, you didn't hear me, and it turns into this big fight. So along the path, somebody said, guess what? When you're doing these custom projects, when you're developing these custom projects, you're inventing something new. You can't look at custom software development projects, for example, like manufacturing. There's no widget that we're just replicating over and over again. We are creating something brand new. This is product development. Like when you're developing a new product and you have to iterate on it and you have to be very creative. So this creativity that plays into these projects points to the fact that we're not sure, right? We're going to iterate. A process like the Agile process encourages it. It's built around the iterative cycle. But if you're using another methodology, guess what? It's going to change too. Like the project itself is what's driving that. Agile accepts it and builds for it because it recognizes its inevitability. But again, no matter what the process is, you have to accept the fact that there's going to be change. If you're too rigid, you will get eaten up. And everything around it will become negative, and that's not a good place to be, not for an awesome project manager. You also need to recognize the limits of the project. So there are constraints. An example of a constraint is a budget. I'm a customer, I have $30,000, that's all I have. I'm a customer, and for whatever reason, I need to have this thing shipped by June 30th, and it needs to work. You know, I've had plenty of scenarios where, you know, we paid our subscription for this other solution up to this date. And if I don't have a new system in place by that date, I'm going to have to pay another $30,000 to that company for another year. And that would be really bad, right? That's a constraint. That's a limitation that's static. I can't control that. So I need to be able to recognize those limits. Because what's going to happen, if change is inevitable and limits exist, then you're going to have all of this change flying around over here, and you're going to have these limits over here. And you need to reconcile those two things. As a project manager, that's your job. You're in the middle of it. So the client comes to you and says, new priority, we have this big report we forgot to tell you about, we told you about it, you didn't hear it, whatever it is, right? We all understand that communication between two humans is not a perfect thing. So there will be misinterpretation, there will be things that are forgotten, there will be things that didn't make it into the planning part of this project. They're going to bring that to you, and you're going to have to recognize and know what the limitations of this project are so that you can reconcile those two. The role of project manager is made up of a series of negotiations. So here's my fallacy. When I first started doing this, I was looking for process because I'm a process guy. I like recipes, right? I like step by step. Here are the steps. You do it, and you do it well, and you do it with discipline, you will succeed. That was my thinking. I accepted the Agile methodology, learned how to do it, followed the steps, no problem. I'm going to win every time. Then after about, I don't know, half a dozen or so projects, I realized I was tired one night. I was complaining to my wife, really tired. Like, what's the problem? I'm like, I just feel like I'm negotiating. Like, every day, it's like a negotiation. I got a developer barking at me here. I got a client barking at me. It's like I'm just constantly negotiating. About a half a dozen projects later, I realized that's actually the job I signed up for. When you're a project manager, you are a negotiator. That's why this is the illustration, because you're in the middle. You're getting it from every direction, you know, and you have to reconcile all of those different changes and requests, the limitations, all those different things that are happening. And you need to learn how to negotiate. Best piece of project management advice or best little nugget that I ever learned came from my brother, who took a sales course and learned about negotiation. And what he said was, what he learned in this sales course is that when you're getting ready to go walk into a challenging situation, a hard conversation, right? Let me give you an example of what would be a hard conversation. Let's just say the technology is not cooperating. We'll use syncing. That seems to be a pretty well known. Right? That seems to be a well known issue, right? So I have an assumption that it's going to take me X number of hours to do this, to implement a sync engine, and then I start to do it, and for whatever reason, that takes a lot longer than I had anticipated. So maybe I'm 10 hours over on this sync functionality, which is imperative. It can't go anywhere, right? So I need to express that to my project owner. I need to set the stage that something is going to be, you know, that this is not good. Like, we're running into a problem here. That would be what I would consider a challenging conversation. I'm about to deliver news that my project owner is not going to be very happy to hear. So I don't want to drop the bombshell, right? I don't want to just send an email. I don't want to leave room for interpretation. So I'm going to have a conversation. And what this technique says is that you establish, you set up that conversation by expressing that it's going to be a challenging conversation before you even have the conversation. Right? So follow me here. I would say to I would call my client if I can be on site, that's even better. But you want to have a conversation. So I might sit down with that client and I might say, hey, I really need to talk to you about something. This is not going to be easy. I've got some news for you that you're not going to want to hear, and frankly, I don't want to tell you, but I have to tell you, and we need to figure out how to we need to figure out how to resolve this problem together. We need to find a solution. So that's it. That was the little technique. And what it does is it completely diffuses the bombshell. It perks perks up the client and says to the client, oh, something's about to happen, and you need my help. What is it? Right? Now they're interested in finding out what it is, and you've set the stage to find a solution together. But that person now knows that you're not malicious, because you're admitting something that is very difficult to admit, right? You're being courageous. And then you say, well, we went ahead and we implemented the sync functionality. The technology didn't cooperate the way that we thought it was going to cooperate. We had an issue, and we've gone way over budget with that particular thing. Now, let's see if we can find a solution. I have some options. I have some ideas. Whatever the rest of that conversation is, it doesn't matter. But you see, what you've done is you've diffused that situation. You've put that person in a position to help you find a solution to a common problem, a problem that you both share. Because it's our budget, right? It's our scope, it's our timeline, it's our project. It's not yours. And I didn't just screw up. We did our best. You're framing it. So that was a little tidbit that I learned about negotiation. And I thought, boy, I could really use that. I started using that in all the projects where I had issues, and I would just set the stage. I don't think so. I think I was here. So the point is that learning a way of expressing flexibility and being flexible in this role, learn as much as you can about how to negotiate. If you're not comfortable with that, that is something that you should learn. Take a class, read a book, right? And again, that was for sales. But I was able to use it with all kinds of different conversations around project management, and it's worked really well. Third attribute is what I'm calling detachment, and this refers to a philosophical term, detachment, from Eastern philosophy. So the idea here is that we as humans intellectually create stories. We recreate our reality around us based on what we receive through our senses. Okay, that's how it works. I see something, I hear something, I smell something, I receive information, and I intellectually create a story about it immediately. Some people do it more than others. You are making meaning, and that meaning that you are making starts to become your reality. So a great example is my wife. She hears a siren and will immediately start to speculate what that siren is, out loud, verbalizing it. If the lights flickered at some point in the last 15 minutes and then she hears a siren, she's like, I think there's an accident on the street down below. She makes meaning. And one thing that I noticed, which was really interesting, she and I recently had a conversation about this, is that oftentimes when this happens, she uses two words, maybe and probably. She'll start a sentence with probably or maybe. And what that means is that she's making meaning. She's making meaning out of a scenario. Well, it's probably an accident down on the street below, with no evidence at all. So now she's creating a reality. She'll believe that. And then unless there's evidence to prove otherwise, right, an accident happened. That's the reality. Well, that same idea happens with projects and with our interaction with our clients, because it's happening all around us all the time. We're constantly making meaning unless we can detach from the story, unless we can set ourselves apart from the story. What happens is, when we don't detach from that, when we personally invest ourselves in it, we start to take on the energy of the project. Now, this is getting a little out there, but follow me for a minute. What an awesome project manager will do is separate him or herself from the project itself. There is not a value judgment happening, right? The project that I'm working on is not a personal reflection of my value as a project manager. It is a separate thing. It exists out here. I am over here. Because these are creative projects, anybody who's involved with the project, including the project manager if they're not careful, puts themselves in a very vulnerable position. Now, developers especially, because developers are like artists in this context, right? And if I'm talking to a painter, for example, if I'm talking to a visual artist and I criticize that visual artist's work, they will take that very, very personally because art is a very vulnerable thing. And it's something that's very personal. And what I have found with managing a lot of developers over the years is that oftentimes developers put themselves in that same vulnerable position as artists. When they create something, right, they're really taking it personally. Now, a client is just trying to get a solution to a problem. And depending on the client, they may or may not be extremely opinionated about how that should look and how that should behave. So what I've experienced is that oftentimes I've had to coach developers away from being personally attached to the project. Because if they get too locked up in it, if they get too attached to that project, and then there's feedback or criticism or the previous slide, which is be flexible, they lose the flexibility and they just can't get past it. Too rigid, right? As an awesome project manager, you need to separate yourself from the project, and then you need to coach the entire team on their own detachment, right? It's your responsibility. You're sitting in the middle of this. It's your responsibility to make sure that nobody gets too worked up, to set up a safe space for feedback and criticism. Because ultimately, our goal with these projects, the ultimate goal, is to find the most accurate solution to the problem possible, period. Doesn't matter what we said during planning, doesn't matter what the technical specification said, none of that matters. At the end of the day, the software that we're creating, or whatever solution you're creating, in our case, software, needs to be accurate, and it needs to resolve the problem. Things are going to change, priorities are going to change. So many things are going to change throughout this process, and none of it matters. What matters is, did we get there? What I have found as an awesome project manager is that by expressing and modeling calmness, you will influence the rest of the team. You will influence and you will teach without teaching everybody else to just calm down. I was subcontracting as a PM for a little while. One company in particular, I was brought in a lot of times when the projects were already kind of off the rails. So unfortunately, I didn't get to experience the love fest. I would be brought in 3 months in when things were really dark. A very dark time. And I would come into these situations that were very hostile. You'd have these developers who, for whatever reason hadn't done a good job, hadn't managed the projects properly or whatever, and clients that were very excited in a variety of ways, and there's very contentious. And so I would have these challenging conversations. And I would use, in my case, I would use some meditation practice prior to the meetings to put myself in the right space, something that I do anyway. So that really is what helped me kind of understand this attribute and see how it works. Get myself in the right space, come into these calls, set it up with my little sales trick. All right, everybody, this is not going to be fun, right? This is not, the next hour is not going to be the best part of your day. We cool? All right, let's talk. Then I would work on diffusing the situation and work on getting everybody sorted out, get options put in place so that everybody could move forward and we can have we can move forward toward a more successful project. The client that I was working with, my client, so I'm subcontracting, my client, after one of these calls, which was particularly filled with tension, says to me, it seems like the more stressful the conversation becomes, the calmer you get. How is that even possible? And I said, because I'm not becoming more calm. I'm staying level. I'm just on the level. I am completely detached from this project. This has nothing to do with me, has nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with my client. My client is not a jerk. They are who they are. I'm sure they're wonderful people. There's no value judgment. It's the project that's the issue, and I'm detached from it. So what appears to be becoming more calm is because everybody else is escalating. They're flying around, right? That's why it seems that way. She was like, oh, okay, whatever. Moving on. No, seriously, it was fun. It was really eye-opening. It was eye-opening for me too. It was eye-opening for her. It was really eye-opening for me to hear that objective perspective. You know what I mean? To say that, because in my mind, what I was doing was I was just setting up for the most objective, non-judgmental space that I could in which to resolve this problem, because everything can be fixed. And in case we need reminded every once in a while, we are writing custom software applications for businesses. We are not, this is not a third world country that is under attack, right? There are big problems in the world, and these are not those big problems. So we just need to work through it. There is a solution to these problems. That is detachment. And when I see this in other people, when I see this in developers, or when I see this in other consultants, boy, it goes a long way. Because when I see the opposite, that's where I see tension. That's where I see people fighting. That's where I see people getting really upset. And it used to really surprise me, the developers that would just be really, really upset. And I would have to explain to them, look, we are consultants. We are being hired to solve a problem. We need to work through this with the client. Here's a little bonus attribute, organization. I don't think this is critical. I know it seems maybe counterintuitive, but depending on where you are within the role of the project. I'm an organized person by nature, and so I have used those skills to help me in my project management career. But I've also seen people who can express those other attributes and aren't particularly organized. They aren't necessarily playing a technical role. Okay, but I throw this in as a bonus attribute because I feel like if you've got that skill as well, you're like if you're sort of like wired that way, then you're definitely going to get extra credit when it comes to analyzing that. So the question is, and this is how we'll wrap up this evening, is, if you're asking yourself, do I want to be a project manager? Do I want to play the project management role? Am I cut out for this type of work? Let me ask a couple of questions, something that you can ponder for yourself. Are you hardwired with these attributes? You kind of know what I'm talking about, right? Are you sort of naturally inclined to be a confident person? Are you naturally inclined to not be rigid, right? Do you go with the flow? Is that your personality type? Can you see what I'm talking about when I say detachment, even if you haven't practiced anything like that? Is that something that you can sort of, understand and grasp? Are you hardwired for it? Or the opposite, do any of these things completely freak you out? Like, does the idea of sitting down across the table from a client and saying, this is going to be a really hard conversation and I'm about to tell you that I just blew it. Like, if that completely freaks you out, then you're probably not hardwired for it. Same with negotiation. Some people cannot negotiate, right? They go into to buy a car or something, and it's just like, they just freeze up, right? Because those guys are so tough. They're just like the car guys, right? And some people love it. Like my dad loved it. My dad was like, can I buy your next car? He just wanted to go to a car dealership and just be like, it was great. Like, I was like 20 years old. I was like buying my first car, and he's like, staring at each other, him and the sales guy. He's like, you know what? We're leaving. And he writes down in front of me. He's like, we'll be at this pizza joint if you change your mind. He walks out. I was like, who's this guy? I'm like, yeah. My dad loved it, right? And then the guy, we would step through the door, and the guy would be, whoa. And my dad would be like, yeah. He's like, let me check with my manager. My dad would be like, so it's like that thing, but some people can't do that. They're not into that. I'm not really into that kind of negotiation, but it doesn't freak me out. It doesn't freak me out in the context of a software development project because I know how to do that. Like, I have muscle memory for that kind of stuff now. And finally, can you define your own success? And this goes back to that thing I said at the very beginning when I was talking about sitting in the middle of that wheel. I know it's different, and the sports analogy might not work so much. I try to come up with another analogy, but a lot of times, like when they win the football game, right? A lot of times it's the guy who caught the pass or the guy who threw the pass or whatever that gets all the accolades, even though the offensive coordinator, right, is usually not on the TV commercials, right? You're right. That's kind of where I'm going with this. The star player is the person who gets the credit. The coach who worked tirelessly the coordinator or whatever who wrote those plays and called those plays and schemed those plays and had to make that critical decision at that critical moment to execute that. Now, granted, the quarterback did execute the play, the wide receiver caught the pass or whatever. But that offense coordinator rarely, like the football geeks know who it is. And they're like, oh yeah, it was a good one, you know, and they can talk around the water cooler, but they're not getting the big endorsements, right? The offensive coordinator. That's kind of what the PM is. You know, when the developer comes in and really puts that solution in place, right, they're the hero. And that's the star of the show. The project manager really isn't. And you can keep that project right down the straight and narrow and just like knock it out of the park, but you're probably not going to get a whole lot of thanks. In fact, you're probably going to be moving on to the next one. You're going to go right into the next negotiation. So when you want to become a project manager and be awesome at it, you really have to define your own success. You have to think to yourself, you know, what is it about this job is successful for me? And are you okay with that? You know, for me, what I ended up seeing as my success were stupid happy clients, you know, and they didn't have to give me a cake. You know what I mean? Like stupid happy clients at the end of the day. And I was like, I did my job. That customer came back. That customer was happy. We deployed with no bugs or whatever. And it's like, I'm satisfied. I didn't need the pat on the back. But defining your own success is a big thing for project managers. And that's what I have for you tonight. Well, I hope it was helpful. Check out Elusive Moose, elusivemoose.com. I spent the first 3 days of this week in Chicago with Molly scheming the next 12 months. We've got some really, really cool stuff that we're going to be pushing out through the Elusive Moose channel. So I encourage you to check it out if you're playing this consultant role. And hopefully you find this stuff equally as helpful there. Thank you again.